San Francisco Bay Area music scene has always been a mecca for many styles. From the Summer of Love and the psychedelic sounds of Jefferson Airplane to the proto-metal of Blue Cheer, the city by the bay kept producing talent after talent. The 1970s spawned such early hard rock acts such as Montrose with Sammy Hagar, the Latin-flavored sounds of Santana, and of course, the experimental fusion of early Journey. The defining moment for the Bay Area hard rock scene was when a young four-piece from the East Bay called Yesterday and Today hit the clubs in the mid-1970s, setting the stage for the soon-to-be identifiable Bay Area heavy metal sound.
Nothing but a name.
Late 70s, early 80s, a lot of bands would come to high schools and play at lunch. I don't think they do that anymore, but Y&T would come to Alameda High and they would play our auditorium, and they were a big band.
There were so many styles of music that were just flowing through all of these types of clubs. And like I said, to some degree that was an advantage for us because we truly stuck out. I mean, in the Bay Area, we stuck out. There was nobody playing hard rock except Ronnie Montrose, realistically. I mean, Journey was playing more, at that time, more spacey kind of, almost instrumentally, oriented kind of stuff before Perry got in. I mean, they're doing, obviously, songs, singing. Greg was singing some great stuff, but they were a little bit more about the musicianship and less about the pop singles, at that time.
The thing about San Francisco was, it's always been a hotbed for music and entertainment. It started back in the late 40s, early 50s with the bebop jazz clubs, and then the beatniks of the early 50s, late 60s comes in this Summer of Love. All of a sudden you have all these clubs already and all these magazines in place. So, Rolling Stone started there in the 60s and stuff. So when my generation got there, with the tail end of punk, you had clubs like the Mab and the Stone and the Waldorf, and they catered to all these things. So you had a bunch of fans going already. You had top-notch nightclubs, and you had a media that reinforced it.
And then eventually Sammy broke out from Ronnie's band and then started doing something, and he was the other guy in the band, in the Bay Area that was doing sort of straight-ahead rock and roll.
As time went on, it was cool to say I play heavy metal. In those days, man, people didn't want to be associated with that. That's why I'm like, fucking get off of it, man. A lot of these fucking bands, man, it's easy to say you're metal. Back in those early days, bands didn't want to call themselves that.
It just seemed a little bit more free up here than anywhere else I'd been. A lot more creativity, a lot more people were more apt to go out on a limb and do different things. There were great young bands out back then that never got a record deal, like Broken Man, or even bands like the Horde of Torment, all these old bands, Epidemic back then, that were bending what heavy music was at the time. It was really cool to be a part of that.
In the late 70s, you did have bands like Yesterday and Today that were really going strong, and then there was even bands that I haven't heard that people mention, like Earthquake. Earthquake was a very good band from the East Bay that had several albums out in the late 70s and early 80s. Sammy Hagar, who was born down in Monterey, he was a rock star in his own right at the time here in the Bay Area.
The bands that started that were hard rock were Yesterday and Today, and this band called Harvey that were like black guys that were killer. They were hard rock.
Harvey was an all-black rock band. Reggie Harvey, right. Donnie Harvey. I can't remember the bass player's name, but great guys. I saw Donnie Harvey first in a band I think called Stratus playing the Lion's Share. I thought, man, this guy is great.
The early shows had bands that were more just straight ahead metal. Anvil, of course, had a more progressive metal influence, and there's bands like there's like this band Steel that had this kind of Judas Priest thing going, and then there was the bands that were just definitely like hair bands.
Well, there was Winterhawk, who were actually Native Americans, and they rocked early on, and then they got more generic over time. But Winterhawk, their first album is intense, and they got, like everybody else, like Y&T, like everyone else, they wrote more and more commercial songs and stuff.
The other guy that came out from that area was Eddie Money.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So it was Eddie Money, Sammy, and Y&T that were constantly playing all the time.
It was just a great scene. It was thriving. It was just a great time for creativity. It was wonderful.
Bay Area did whatever they wanted, but always so respectful.
So Eric Martin was one of the best acts. Mile High is one of the best acts. Violation was a cool band.
MK or
Blue, yeah.
Chumby.
Chumby.
Chumby was great.
That's a good band.
And then there was Violation, Blue Food, and Anvil Chorus.
Right.
Who else? Good. There was Roadrunner. What other big bands were out there? Oh, it's Naughty. Yeah, they were nice guys.
They were our biggest competition.
Yeah.
But the nicest guys in the world.
Yeah. As musicians growing up in our early teenage years, we were somewhat confused by the psychedelic stuff that like Hendrix would kind of put out, and then there was like the heaviness that the Black Sabbath records had, which had a huge, profound influence on everyone. Then there was the Y&T thing, or which was Yesterday and Today, because they were hard rock homeboys, you know, they're right from here. Then there was like the Genesis influence, and then the progressive stuff like Alan Holdsworth and UK and things like that came in, and then Rush.
A lot of bands were progressive. They were trying to play progressive type rock, what was popular on the radio, and they were kind of fucking snobby, dude. They didn't like that hard shit, man. Really. A lot of them jumped on the bandwagon later. But really, in those early days, my friend, a lot of those bands, look, they didn't think that music was going any fucking where, man.
The summer of '79, I got a call from this producer, Bob Heyman, that was doing a rock opera called Rock Justice that Marty Balin had written. And so he actually knew who I was from this all-girl band. So that the all-girl band kind of opened up the doors for me to play with all these other people that I had. So I did this, it was a rock opera. It was originally supposed to be recorded for HBO.
Right.
One of the first HBO videos. It was recorded live. And it was supposed to be a story about a rock singer who gets hauled into court for failing to have a hit. So it's basically like a satire of the record industry,
right,
which Marty Balin obviously knew a lot about. And then Mike Varney played guitar, and this is before he had Shrapnel Records.
Right. But yeah, Steel Wind was great. There's a band I think called Airborne around for a minute that turned into Heist. Okay. Some of the guys turned into Heist from Airborne. They were great. I used to go see all the bands. I mean, there was the early years. There was a lot of really great stuff out there.
By the late 1970s, an ever-growing choice of concerts was giving exposure to the European hard rock bands that came over the pond to play such festivals as the Day on the Green or the large venues around the Bay. Acts like Judas Priest, UFO, The Scorpions, and Thin Lizzy all started to inspire a whole new generation of young musicians. But what really made the biggest impact was the explosion of a new wave of British heavy metal, spearheaded by Motorhead, Saxon, Angel Witch, and Iron Maiden.
After that school year finished in June of 1981, I kind of just got a little kind of disillusioned with being there, and this was the first time that I could sort of take off by myself. So I took off and went back to Europe, to England specifically, and that was when I did the whole kind of run away with Diamond Head and stayed with Sean Harris and Brian Tatler, and went back to Denmark and made some money, and went back to England, bought records and found Saxon and hung out with Motorhead at their rehearsal studio in London, and went to a bunch of shows, the Port Vale Heavy Metal Holocaust, and so that was that summer. And then I was so kind of invigorated and so fired up by spending 3 months in Europe, July, August, September of 1980. Then I came back and I called this guy I'd met briefly named James Hetfield, and then here we are.
A lot of my friends had bands, and they were all more like Judas Priest. That was like the big thing, and then bands like from LA, like that kind of look with a lot of stripes and yellow and red and black, and so I roadied for a lot of friends, bands like Black Leather, Roulette, and I remember I had a lot of riffs, but I didn't start a band yet because I was really into Maiden, but everybody was doing the Maiden thing, so I was just like, well, I really don't want to do that. I want to try to do something different. And it wasn't until I actually roadied for my friend's band Roulette, and it was a show. It was Roulette, a band from LA called Metallica, Lars Rocket, and yeah, when Metallica came on, it was just like, wow, this is cool. You know, it was totally something different. It was totally metal, like new wave of British heavy metal. Had that kind of guitar playing, but the drums were super fast, you know, kind of like GBH or something. And I think for everybody, it was just kind of like, automatically after that night, I think they were like the favorite band in the Bay Area, and they weren't even from the Bay Area. And they even moved up here because of that. They just felt the love.
And I think the first time we played the Waldorf was probably 82, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
The scene was changing very, very rapidly at that time. Music was in general, so it was a great time to play any club, you know. The crowd was there. It was exciting. We really were lucky to be able to play.
It did seem to spring up almost, not overnight, but the metal scene
very, very
exploded
rapidly.
really, really quickly, and it was right up our alley of what we were doing. And it was just good to walk into a club. There felt like a unity there. Or it was, it might sound cliche. People, you know, kind of dressed the same, all there for the same thing. There was a scene for sure, and you felt it in the air, like a buzz almost in the air. And, you know, you went to see other bands. There were bands around back in the day. I can remember bands like Griffin, you know, great bands.
Great band,
you know, Third Rail. There were some really good heavy rock bands doing the same thing. And
Wizard was good.
When the Metal Monday first came out in 1981, yes, the new wave of British heavy metal was going strong, but I think it was born out of its own movement, right? The rebellious movement against some of those AOR melodic bands like Journey that were taking out kind of the wimpier road. Not no disrespect, but you know, it was kind of its own movement. I think it would have happened even without the new wave of British heavy metal.
A lot of the metal bands, I mean, Metallica was around, and Exodus. You know, real infant stages, but it was, you know, also bands like Roadrunner and Head On and kind of more the straightforward rock stuff.
Roadrunner was going on when I was in the other band as a guitar player. They were popular and stuff, and then and Head On I thought was the best of all of those bands. You know what I mean? They're like, you know, and they were doing the whole hair thing and stuff too, and you know, their stuff was really commercial too, you know what I mean? They had it all, I thought.
I loved Head On. I always wanted to form a band with Frank, the guitar player. But we even tried, me and Varney tried to get him for Cinema, but he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. We wanted him bad.
But Head On should have made it. Head On was everybody's dream. Cool. And so for people mentioning them, it makes sense because, you know, they really were inspirational.
As a singer, I was kicked out of Righteous Ire for a brief time, and then I went into a band called Malibu Barbie and was the singer for Malibu Barbie.
They were an all-girl band.
They were. Matter of fact, I'm on Wikipedia as the singer for an all-girl band.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty famous for that.
When I first got here, I fell into hanging out with people like that. I hung out with Journey, and I had the privilege of meeting Grace Slick. So it was kind of that arena rock thing. And then I auditioned for a band called The Rude Girl, and the rehearsal studio was at Haight-Ashbury, which was really cool to me coming from upstate New York. It was like Hendrix, Joplin, Grace Slick, you know, hippie town. So when I went there, it was just the breeding ground. I mean, that's where Metallica, we used to eat at the same pizza shop, and Exodus, and Testament. It was that hardcore scene that I got thrown into. And I was also a late bloomer to Dio and Sabbath. So that was a whole new world for me. It was pretty incredible.
Really, we had no idea what was happening, that we were creating something in the Bay Area. Vicious Rumors, Death Angel, Legacy became Testament, Damage, Lost Rocket, you know what I mean? The list goes on, Forbidden.
Everyone thought that we were in this like secret little club almost, you know. You'd see people dressed like this in the leather. It wasn't total mainstream and on the radio all the time. So we felt that we were jumping in on the ground floor of something that was a little below the radar, you know.
And it was changing very rapidly at that time. Yeah. Through the early 80s all the way through to the end, it was changing, you know.
We were all discovering these English bands that were starting to come over in 1980, and Def Leppard played in May with Pat Travers. Scorpions played in May 1980.
The first time I heard Merciful Fate and King Diamond's voice, I'm like, what is this? And the changes, the guitar changes, nobody ever did stuff like that. It was kind of like pretty much you know, the song's got 4/4 times, got a bridge in, it's got a chorus, and then maybe a lead section and end. That was the first time where there was a total change in the middle of the song, you know, that went somewhere else. And I think a lot of
journey.
It was a total. It still is, and it's, you know, those were the types of things that formed thrash metal. I mean, we were like, let's have changes like this, you know, let's
Come
go
out of nowhere, but totally
right,
fit,
exactly, but still fit.
I don't think there's any one event that brought, that created sort of the Bay Area metal movement or thrash movement or whatever. I think everybody got inspired around the same time. So that certainly the new wave of British heavy metal, you know, I was inspired by that, and a lot of other people were inspired by that. Saxon, bands like Iron Maiden, of course, you know, Tigers of Pantang, those bands were a big influence on Ruffians, with the foundation, of course, of bands like Judas Priest, Scorpions, and Deep Purple. But the new wave of British heavy metal definitely was the icing on the cake.
July, Judas Priest finally played a big show at the Warfield of 1980. That was huge. That was a huge metal scene. You know, whoever we'd get on tour, the biggest one really didn't happen until July of 1981 when Motorhead arrived. That changed everything.
We were so interested in what was going on in other parts of the world, what they were doing musically, new wave of British sound. I mean, we all love Def Leppard, Tigers of Pantang, Tokyo Blade, Angel Witch, Crocus. I mean, we loved all of those bands, totally. And those are the bands we modeled ourselves after.
He was actually very enticing to be part of the scene when it was like it was between 83 and 88 up there or whatever, just because it was as loud, as crazy, as partying as any scene going in music. And we always kind of felt like the underdog, like the you know, the stepchild, or however you want to put it, in terms of these other markets. And we sort of embodied that, and we embraced it, because we're going to go after it harder, we're going to party harder, we're going to be way crazier than you people. You know, if you want crazy, we're going to bring crazy, and we certainly did.
There were some great thrash bands, and Legacy evolved into Testament. I liked the more progressive bands like Blind Illusion could go off, could be everything from thrash to these intense, you know, Les Claypool inspired jam sessions, and Anvil Chorus, of course, was hard rock.
And the scene was so big and thriving because we were all in high school. So you had the high school word of mouth that you don't get with these newer bands. I was like, it ain't like it used to be. It's because we were all fucking kids, dude. Like everybody told everybody. We had kegger parties and we tore down fences, and it was way different. Things were crazy, you know. There's a bunch of kids raging. So you don't have that.
There was Anvil Chorus, and then there was a band called Church of Metal. They turned into Metal Church and went up to the northwest.
With the Anvil Chorus guys, they were the Church of Metal.
Right.
Shortened it to Metal Church.
And then they moved.
And then Kurt moved back to Seattle, and didn't hear from him for 2 years until they came back with a great album. But Merciless Onslaught, one of the most intense. I mean, faster than any. I tried to get Lars to audition as drummer for Metal Church in 1981. He disappeared. That's the first time he disappeared. I don't think he was ready to play.
I showed him my songs, my manager that ended up becoming Death Angel's manager later. And my manager now to this day, and Christina Aguilar's manager. Christina, she was just had a little record store. She started at 18 years old, put on Katrina Sardosky, put on her own gigs. And she just had this really flair and taste and was like upon her years. So I played her the thing and I kind of sang the song. She goes, man, that's really cool. I could get you some studio time. So I got a little studio time, made a little demo. She was friends with Kirk Hammett. She played it for Kirk Hammett. He goes, I want to get in production. This guy's got like a really cool voice. It sounds like a guitar sometimes or something. So then I ended up doing a demo with him, and that's how the band started.
We started playing around 84. We played tons of shows in 84. Carl Albert was the singer, and we played in LA, up and down the West Coast. Played with some great bands. Played with, I remember playing with City Kid. Ended up being Tesla, and they had opened up for us one time. Another time I thought, oh man, yeah, we're in trouble. These guys are good, you know. And yeah, it was we shared the bill with Vicious Rumors, shared the bill with Armored Saint, shared the bill with Loudness, Keel, Saxon, a lot of national acts.
Like the guys at Vicious Rumors that just started their band, we'd all like be sleeping on couches. Half the time there was no PG&E, and everybody survived by working at record stores, which was like the coolest job at the time.
That Bay Area metal scene was thriving and happening before Metallica ever showed up. So anybody who's out of the US who sees this, just know that the Bay Area metal scene started prior to that.
The rise of metal gave birth to many European magazines. This inspired the launch of two highly influential Bay Area fanzines, Metal Mania and Metal Rendezvous. In addition, college station KUSF's Rampage Radio, hosted by Ron Quintana and Ian Callan, played a huge role in supporting the scene. Finally, the record stores, specifically Bill Burkard's Record Exchange and the Record Vault, not only brought in the hard-to-find European imports, but hosted bands for in-stores and carried all the local bands' demo cassettes, most notably Metallica's No Life to Leather, which brought the hammer down.
I really thought the BAM magazine served a super important part in the metal community. It wasn't so much that they featured metal bands on the covers or what have you, or even had articles on them, but that's where, at least my friends and I, that's where we got our listings. That's when we knew who was playing Metal Mondays, who was playing Keystone Berkeley, Stone San Francisco, Keystone Palo Alto.
And between everything was this little black and white rag, this little thing all crumpled up, opened up, said Metal Mania. I pulled out this little rag that introduced me to all this stuff. I was reading about Merciful Fate, and I was like, they're supposed to be as evil as Satan, you know, so I was like, I'm in. I wanted the heaviest stuff, so that was my introduction to everything, and I was 13 years old at that time.
And one day, our high school friend, Tim Korochikov, who grew up in the Ukraine, and he showed up with this 10-page, really badly copied on some cheap copier, a little magazine. Couldn't even call it a magazine, with one staple in the corner, right? And he called it Metal Rendezvous. And I said, this is really cool. This is kind of what we're talking about, right? And I looked through it and I said, man, Tim, you did this? And where did you get the interviews? And he said, just talk to some people, you know, local bands. It's really nobody that huge or famous was in it, but the idea was there, right? And he really deserves the credit for truly giving us the kick in the ass to get this thing up and moving. And when we decided to do another issue, Bill Hale and I were fully involved, and eventually I took over as editor and made it into what it was towards the end of the 80s, when we were publishing 125,000 copies in full color.
And Metal Rendezvous, I mean, John and Bill Hale for doing the photos. I mean, when I was young, these were like rock stars to me as a musician.
And then Aardschok, the first real metal fanzine from Holland, sent me some of their issues. So I started cutting out pictures of theirs and then pasting them on my tape lists. And then Motorhead played. And suddenly I had a million great pictures.
It was the same thing in the fanzine scene, you know. You, Bob, you had Headbanger, right? Me, we had Metal Rendezvous. We weren't competing. Right. We were supporting each other and we appreciated each other. Ron Quintana with Metal Mania, you know, we were supporting each other and appreciating each other. And that were, you know, Kick-Ass Monthly, right, out on the East Coast.
Then I Xerox copied these little 8x11s, folded them over, because we didn't have enough to be a real magazine. We didn't have enough to be a real magazine till much, much later. But so we folded them, and they were little Metal Manias, and Lemmy was on the first few covers, and Judas Priest, and Scorps, and Y&T, and you name it. But that quickly evolved in August of 1981.
We brought in Kerrang. We were actually running a U.S. subscription service for Kerrang for a while. Not sanctioned, but simply, you know, if you want Kerrang, we'll mail it to you every month. I brought in hundreds of copies of each one. And then as far as the fanzines go, man, I tell you what, it was like Metal Rendezvous magazine. The Crucible was a magazine that we did.
Metal Mania.
Metal Mania, yeah.
So San Francisco was just exploding. They kept doing our show, expanded Rampage Radio. So we'd have to have 6 hours a week of local demos and metal and metal and metal. So and then all the local metal nights. There was just so many new bands. When I got back from Europe, I was amazed.
I think Rampage Radio was really instrumental in exposing people to metal that they would otherwise have never heard. I'm pretty sure we are the first ones that ever played Metallica on the air. I know Yngwie Malmsteen. I remember when we got Yngwie's demos, like we'd play that all the time, and we just like start the whole "Hey, Yngwie's God," riff that I later came to regret because he started to believe that he was God.
Well, I think Rampage Radio and Ron Quintana, definitely had a major impact, because I remember lots of my friends they told me about Rampage Radio, and I think it was Yngwie, it was him spinning Yngwie's demos that really got Rampage Radio known.
The Record Vault. The Record Vault was the bomb. That had the best imports, the best selection of wall-to-wall metal and demos. I got the Legacy demo there. They had Attitude Adjustment. They had all these great bands before they even got signed, their early demos, and just all these overseas, these bootlegs, killer t-shirts, anything you needed. I would go spend my entire paycheck at the Record Vault.
Everybody made a pilgrimage to the Record Vault. It was almost like a religious experience. That place, that was the place, you know what I'm saying? As we heard all the news, they introduced me to Ron Quintana. And Ron Quintana, that was the first person that I heard call the music thrash. He was the first person to play us on the radio. I love that guy, man.
We had a little record store in Fremont, California called the Record Factory. And the Record Factory was where I'd pick up when I first got there, my Iron Maiden stuff, because I was still into the standards Maiden, Priest, except Saxon.
We had the Record Vault and the Record Exchange, two different heavy metal record stores, that could actually make a living off of it being a heavy metal record store. So the scene was thriving at the time. This was the place to be.
And then I started going over to London every month or two, and I'd bring back a lot of memorabilia, the really nice cast metal pins and patches and all the fun stuff. So we had quite an assortment of stuff.
There was a store that opened up in Lafayette. It was called the Record Exchange. And it was like the Lafayette's version of the Record Vault in San Francisco. And I remember walking in there, and they didn't have like anything commercial. It was just like, they had Unleashed in the East, they had the new Iron Maiden record, and I'd never seen that. I don't even know what that was yet. It was just like it just came out. Venom. And here I'm in 8th grade, just going, wow, what is this stuff? It looked cool. It looked really, everything was evil.
I was virtually living in my Volkswagen bus on Polk Street and doing the Record Vault. After the Record Vault, I went over to Walnut Creek and helped Bill Burkard turn Record Exchange into a metal store. Right. He was doing like a new wave and punk store, and then we wanted to go metal, and he knew I had done it over in Record Vault in San Francisco. Right. So we started doing it there.
I started to search for the imports, and I hooked up with a couple really cool people that helped me bring stuff into the country, because at that time nobody was carrying it here, and all of a sudden I was the guy with the AC/DC records. And that was little old Walnut Creek, 30 some odd miles outside of San Francisco, and in suburban milk toast land. And we started to get all these headbanger kids coming out from Berkeley and San Francisco.
When I didn't do the Record Vault anymore, I did the Record Exchange, and we had Trouble, we had Overkill, we had Metallica, we had Slayer. That was another all metal store with the lined up around the corner for these in stores.
Me and a couple friends of mine, that was probably about 5 of us, decided to cut school. We were seniors, and went there to go meet them to do the in-store. And we got there, and there was no one there. It was only them. So it was just my friends and Motley Crue, and they wanted beer, so we went and got somebody to buy some Moosehead for us, and we shared Mooseheads with them, and it was pretty cool hanging out with them.
So then we have Slayer come to the in-store at Walnut Creek, and we let Slayer in, and that blonde-haired dude that played guitar tackled my Iron Maiden stand-up. I had an Eddie Peace of Mind stand-up, and this kid rolled in there and just jumped on that shit on the floor and fucked it all up. So I picked him up by the neck and took him in the back room, and it was Jeff Hanneman. I was pissed at that kid, dude. I was going to kill him. And so there was kids back there going, "You're mean," because I was like giving him some shit. And I go, "Dude, I would never go to your house and fuck your shit up like that, dude. What did you do that for?" And he goes, "Dude, mean, you're posers." And it's all this kind of shit, dude.
Mick Mars was just kind of standing there with the shades on, kind of just, looking around. And he was talking to me, my friend says, "Oh, so where do you live?" And we were like kind of creeped out. And then Tommy comes up and sticks a moose head right up his butt. And he's all, "Don't do that."
Of course, we sold No Life to Leather and a couple different versions of that. And the ones I sold that were actually in Lars' handwriting. He wrote on each cassette. And I remember that because he was like, "I got to write this down," But they'd bring them out and we'd sell what we could. And we made a promise to the bands back then that we were never going to copy these things and resell them on our own, that we'd buy them from the band if they could just bring them out.
Right.
And we held to that as far as I knew we did.
The independent record stores, for me, was really about the record exchange. And I cannot tell you how many things Bill turned. A lot of them I didn't like, some of them I did, but I remember getting Holocaust and thinking that was the most amazing record. Bill always had great vinyl, and I think I even bought the Violation 7-inch there. And I always thought Violation was this great Bay Area metal band that Leonard Hayes had produced of Y&T, and I really thought that band deserved a better fate.
The Bay Area was long known for producing guitar legends. In the 70s, Carlos Santana, Ronnie Montrose, Neil Schon, and Y&T's Dave Meniketti set the bar for guitar heroics. In the 80s, the pioneer in bringing new guitar talent to the public eye was Mike Varney, whose US metal compilation records gave worldwide exposure to new talent. Mike also brought over the newest guitar virtuoso since Eddie Van Halen, Yngwie Malmsteen. All this created an explosion of Bay Area shredders. Joe Satriani, Marty Friedman, Jason Becker, among others, they all became the latest guitar heroes.
That's one thing about thrash metal is everybody really liked a lot of European bands. So like you have Schenker, Uli, Frank Marino, Glenn Tipton and KK. So those were big influences on thrash metal, those kind of guitar players.
I really think that beyond BAM magazine, if somebody said to me, Brinkerhoff, what are the most important elements or who was highly influential in the Bay Area metal scene, I really think it was Mike Varney.
What happened was I was a guitar teacher and I made a lot of money. I wasn't a very good guitar player. I had the skills of, maybe like a Punky Meadows or something, And so I was giving all these kids lessons, because I was a cool guy. And I had all these kids in Marin and they were giving me good money for lessons. It was a good job. I was like in high school, And then all of a sudden, I started losing students. Like 2 dropped out and then I'd be like, what's going on? What's going on? And then finally, somebody came to me and said, this guy, Mike Varney, is stealing all your students. I go, who's this fucking Mike Varney guy, right?
It was in 1980, and I was a record collector and was just kind of upset that there was hardly any metal coming out. And I knew that people were interested in it, but I was having to buy imports, and America was taken with disco and taken with new wave, which is watered down punk rock, and things were just... I just wasn't able to get enough metal, so I decided, well, I'll get my own.
So then I went to him, and I said something like, hey, buddy, why are you stealing all my guitar students and all this stuff? And then he showed me what a great guitar player he was, and I was like, well, that's why right there. He's way better at lead than I am, so that's why they're all going to him.
By the time I was 20, 21, I had met Jeff Pilson, and we did that Rock Justice record with Leonard Hayes and Phil Kennemore from Y&T, and Yesterday and Today at the time. But by 1980, I'd already kind of seen where the bread was buttered, and didn't really want to be an artist because I just thought of the overwhelming odds of doing anything. And I was gonna get married, and I thought, why am I gonna work so hard to be away from this person I love 6 to 8 months out of the year if everything goes right. So I'm trying to build the house up the front. At night, I'm taking the bricks out the back and not getting anywhere. So I said, I'm gonna do a label.
I do remember I was so psyched after that US Metal album, even though I didn't think it was great all the way through, but I did like some of the people on it. I wrote to P.O. Box P in Novato, wrote a letter to Mr. Varney and get some call back from him. And of course, Varney's legendary. He'd always call you with somebody else on the line that he wouldn't tell you was on the line and go, hey, Brian, what do you think of like Pete Marino of Le Mans? Oh, I think he's great. Hey, Brian, Pete's on the line. Hey, say hello to Pete, you know, and he was always, you know, and I used to joke with Varney, he would always do what I call the AT&T mix.
I was looking at this, the state of guitar at that time, and I thought, God, Europe has got Uli John Roth, we got Gary Moore, we got all these great players. Man, Hendrix and Van Halen, and sure there were a lot of people that filled the cracks in between, but we didn't really have, you know, a super shredder, you know, in heavy metal at that point in time that was new, and I knew there had to be somebody out there. So I wrote to magazines, state to state, or called the editors actually, and said, look, I'm putting a record together of the best unknown guitar players. I think your area's got somebody? Oh yeah, we got 3 guys that. So nobody said we don't have anybody. Nobody said, Oregon, we don't have anybody here. Everybody had somebody.
He promoted the guitarists, and so they didn't have to be that metal, but the guitarist on each of those songs was ripping, shredding, like Chumby and Lyle Workman. They were just shredders, and we all worship shredders.
So the Mike called me and he goes, there's these guys in Chicago called Le Mans, and they're really cool, and they got rooster hair like you. Like you might just fit with these guys really well. He goes, they need a singer. The bass player is not that great of a singer, but the band is killer. And it's got that guy Derek Frigo. And I had seen Derek Frigo because he came out with Lucy Forbes. Lucy Forbes was trying to sell him to major bands. She brought him to LA and San Francisco. This is Derek Frigo. And Derek Frigo was like 12 years old, 13 years old, and he was already doing coke. You know what I'm saying? Like at 13 years old, and he had the crazy rooster, and he was kind of like a Jeff Beck meets who's the guy with Billy Idol? Steve Stevens. He was that, and he had the great Van Halen style.
There were clubs to play every weekend. I met Mike Varney very, very early on from moving to San Francisco. He had become a friend of mine. He obviously really trusted in my talent. When Rude Girl ended, as I said before, I literally called him immediately, and he hooked me up with David Chastain.
How I got an Anvil course, that after I was in Rock Justice, I'd known Mike Varney from Rock Justice, and he had these 2 young guitar players that were, I was 20 and they were 16, so when you're 20 you're already like, I'm a grown up, and 16-year-olds, high school kids. It was Dan Meblin and Bob Gillis, and they were like shredder guitar players, and so Mike Varney got me into a band with those 2 guys, with this other singer named Peter Marino.
So Bill Burkard, he said, hey, this exchange student's over here from Sweden and brought this tape into this guy. You should hear him. So it was Malmsteen.
How did it feel dealing with the fact that we have Yngwie coming onto the scene? How was that? Well, let me tell you, as a guitar player, it was pretty shocking. I mean, this guy was pure talent, you know, and he came from another planet, Sweden, and came into our scene and just kind of like, just turned it upside down. It was incredible. And this is after Van Halen had already single-handedly done that too. So this was like, when I was mentioning earlier, we didn't really realize we were in such a special area or a special time, but this is one of those moments where we kind of realized, where I could step aside and think to myself, wow, man, this is something really special going on here.
And he gave Bill the tape, and Bill played it for me, and I said, wow, this is great, but the guy's in Sweden. I'm a young guy, I'm thinking how crazy it would be to deal with immigration and get some guy over here. It just was way above my station in life at that point in time. I thought, how can I do that? Then like 2 months later, Yngwie sent me a tape directly, just coincidentally. And I wanted to put him together with Billy Sheehan and Leonard Hayes. That was the plan, you know, it's what I wanted to do. And then Ron Keel came up to my house and with his fiancée Dee Dee, and they were looking for a guitar player. I said, well, here's this guy I'm thinking of doing something with. And I played it for Ron, and Ron's like, oh yeah, man, that's the guy, whatever. So I said, okay. So Yngwie was really excited about coming out and doing it. I got a letter from him somewhere in my archives where he's really psyched. But that didn't last too long.
I loved him so much. I had never seen Van Halen live, so this was extra exciting.
Alcatraz, Yngwie had already left Steeler, and so he left to join up with Graham Bonnet, who was his big, huge, you know, one of his big rainbow things. And so he had a chance to move up, and so he was doing this Alcatraz thing, and Alcatraz was supposed to come out and play. And of course secured the support spot for this show. But Alcatraz canceled. And so Ian Callan and Ron, who they're from the Rampage radio show, Ian came with this idea. He said, well, why don't we just fly him up and he can come out and play with you guys. We can play with the Anvil Chorus. And I go, wow, cool, let's do it. Okay, so Ian gets in touch with Yngwie and says, hey, we know that you want to come up here. There's a shit ton of fans. You can come up here and play for them. You can play with this backup band, Anvil Chorus. They'll their rhythm section will play with you. And so Yngwie says, yes, we'll do it.
Yngwie had this band, it was called Alcatraz. Right. And Anvil Chorus was going to open up for them that night at, I think it was not the Old Waldorf, it was that other place that Bill Graham had after Old Waldorf. Not the Warfield.
Kabuki.
Not the Kabuki, it was on Columbus. Wolfgang's, okay. I think it was at Wolfgang's, or possibly it was the Old Waldorf we were going to open up for. And we had done the sound check, and the entire Alcatraz band ended up quitting on Yngwie because he was such a dick. So after the sound check, I went back to my house, who I lived with Ian Callan, and I was talking to my roommate, Michelle Castro, going, that fucking Yngwie, what a dick that guy is. And I'm like completely bagging on him on the phone. I turn around and he's like standing in my hallway with Ian, and I was like, so we ended up having to be his backing band that night.
When I was in Cacophony and we were doing like, the Go Off album live, I was the first time I felt like I was in a band like Judas Priest or something. I mean, this is like really, I was like, this is great,
I remember Peter Marino saying, this is a short show one time, so let's skip guitar solos. So I got all Yngwie on him.
Well, Marty Friedman was around kind of from the very beginning, and he was a teenager. I wanted to do something with him, yeah, and so we got him on the compilations. I did the Hawaii record, and then he moved out to San Francisco. And he had some demos that he made on a 4-track or something, and I thought, that's just cool stuff.
I took all of my shit, which was like nothing. It was like a guitar and an amp in a small suitcase. I said, I'm never going back to Hawaii again. I don't care what I'm doing. And we had 7 gigs in LA and 1 in San Francisco. All the LA gigs got canceled. We get to LA, we thought we were gonna be superstars. We were so rad. As soon as we play for anybody, we're gonna get signed right away. Look at all these metal bands getting signed. They're gonna love our shit. All our gigs got canceled. You set us up with 1 gig at Radio City, which we did, and I don't remember much of it. But I remember our next gig was in San Francisco the next day. We had no transportation to get to that gig, so we were asking people in the parking lot, hey, you want to drive us and our gear to San Francisco for our gig tomorrow? And so somebody did. Some dude, a cool dude named Ralph, and if you're out there, dude, I'm thankful for the ride, drove us all up to the gig in San Francisco. We played in Ruthie's Inn, which is a big thrash place. Right. And Legacy played there with Alex Skolnick was in the band. Sure. And we rocked that show. I mean, it was the best show Hawaii ever had, because actually we were playing to fans who could probably relate to what we were doing. Because it was a small KUSF, was it, the station?
Ron Quintana.
That would promote metal, and they would promote underground stuff like us. So like the few people in the audience knew who we were, and to them it's like, oh my God, they've arrived from somewhere to play, and we played a really good show. And I have great memories of that particular show. But then after the show, we all went our separate ways. I don't even remember where the rest of the band members were. I never saw any of them again. Didn't say like see you or anything. It's like show was over, and then we just like poof, we were gone.
And what was your thought when you first got together with Marty Friedman?
It only took a few minutes for me to know he was a genius, and I wanted to learn from him.
I remember being at Hun Sound in Santa Fe with Dean Casanova, Marty Friedman, Jason Becker, Jimmy O'Shea, and me, and we're rehearsing, and I was like, pinch yourself now, motherfucker, because you ain't ever going to find a band like this again.
And then Jason Becker sent me something. He was 16. Yeah. And so actually I recorded Jason Becker. We did Perpetual Burn when Jason was 17. And his parents had to sign, or his dad or whatever, parents signed some kind of a guardian type of thing to make the contract enforceable, because he's a minor. And it was really cool. Jason was a wonderful guy, is a wonderful guy, and same with Marty. And I thought that Marty had some maturity and experience, but that Jason had this crazy musical ideas and technical facility. I thought, how great would it be if these guys got together and did something? So they just hit it off like a house on fire. They're still best friends to this day, as far as I know.
After I left Cacophony, I recorded a bunch of songs that were more like Van Halen. So Varney said that is why he recommended me to David Lee Roth.
Alex definitely, with his sound and my songwriting and, you know, riffs and stuff, together we had the formula of what Metallica and Exodus have as far as being heaviness, but then solo-wise, you know, we had, you know, the George Lynch and the Yngwie and the Schenker kind of old school melodicness all put together.
The new wave of British heavy metal certainly changed the environment of the Bay Area metal scene. The young new bands took this European sound and elevated it to more aggressive and faster levels. Led by the arrival of Metallica from Los Angeles and the local rebels Exodus, they were soon followed by Death Angel and Legacy, who later became Testament.
You know, Slayer started coming up here. Death Angel popped up. Actually, they were playing like the clubs like a year before us. And then Exodus, of course, and then Legacy, and then Forbid, and then Violence. It just all was like it just all happened so quick. It was weird. You know, all of a sudden we had this new scene.
Nobody knew what it was yet, and nobody knew how to contain it, and nobody knew how to security it.
And then Metallica comes on, and it all kind of fit together and gelled really well. So those two bands were actually very much spearheading what was to become this new Bay Area thrash thing, you know? My band, Anvil Chorus, was doing like this pompous kind of keyboardy thing, and, you know, it was fun. But when I saw all this, what the Metallica guys and Exodus guys were doing, it's like, God damn, this is exactly kind of like what I want to be doing too. I've always been like this.
A lot of us in Exodus and in Legacy, and again, all the other bands that were around at the time, Death Angel, you know, Possessed, everybody, all fed off of that.
When bands like Metallica, you know, even Slayer started, they didn't move here, but they would start coming up here and playing a lot of shows because this is where they would do good. And then the fans just adopted to that, and then you had all these bands that didn't really know what they wanted to do, but when they heard that, they kind of just, like, you know, bands like my band, Legacy, and just Death Angel and Exodus, they all kind of just changed when those bands came. And it was like a domino effect. I mean, there was just so many bands here that just adopted that sound.
I wasn't interested in the Seattle scene at all, but the Bay Area thrash metal scene caught my attention. It was like taking what the bands in the mid-'80s were doing, it took it up about 2 notches. And it was still hard and guitar driven, but yet melodic at the same time.
We didn't know that it was like it was like the first incarnations of a certain genre of music or anything, but, you know, we just thought, push the boundaries as much as, you know, as much as the next band, and you're all playing with all the baddest of the Bay.
But some of the guys didn't want to go thrash. You know, this was a kid thing. Right. The youngsters were like into the new thing, which was thrash. And the older guys, you know, they were like trying to stick with that 70s hard rock thing. Yeah. They didn't want the screaming going on. They didn't want to get real fast. So you had that kind of shit going on at the time.
When thrash metal took over, I think it fed all the people who were into metal that always felt that it didn't take it far enough. And it gave them a platform and something to follow. And because of that, when Metallica exploded, I mean, then bands like Exodus started getting more notice. Testament, finally, that got into form.
83, I think Blizzard evolved into Possessed.
I remember there was that band Blizzard. Somebody, please hook me up with a Blizzard demo.
Okay, El Cerrito, Metallica Mansion. They used to have parties there late at night. People were coming. There was kids that were starting a band called Possessed. There was a lady, Debbie Abono, that was going to manage them. There was a band called Monolith that was there.
So when I started there, I had very little knowledge of the heavy music movement up here. So guys like Jason from Chaos, Harold O, kind of helped refine to me what the vision of metal was. They kind of helped to stir my interest in what was going on, because even though I was at the Omni and I was primarily booking a lot of the hair metal bands, I had to learn that genre real quickly. And so they kind of like handheld me into the situation. So I would, you know, going from seeing bands like, Laughing Dead, and Death Angel, and all these bands playing the Omni, and getting that experience and getting to meet who Chuck Billy is and all these cats, when they were coming up, right when they were starting, it was a time when it almost didn't matter what was at the room. People were out to see the bands because it was that exciting, because you never knew when you were going to see the next Metallica at a venue. It was that hot back then.
I don't think at the time we ever realized that it would have an effect, that it did. Perhaps even to this day, of the scene that the San Francisco thrash scene created.
Well, there was no order back then. I mean, people would tie string around barrels and think that was a barricade, and they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what was going to happen.
We didn't see the need to put any kind of onus on their experience. We wanted them to have that experience. That was part of the culture, was the slam dancing and the stage diving and pogoing or whatever, depending on what show you're at. So it was our job to make sure that everybody that was doing that were safe while they were doing it.
Led by YNT and the major European acts, there were many who stayed true to the more traditional style, with bands like Vicious Rumors, Lars Rocket, Steel, Griffin, and the more progressive Anvil Chorus and Broke as Hell. However, they were often overshadowed by the punk and the burgeoning thrash movement.
There wasn't too much hard rock stuff in San Francisco. It was more punk. Back in those days, it was big time punk. So people laughed at the hard rock guys and the long-haired guys, because punk was a big fashion.
The punk scene was just exploding in London, really, around that time that we left. We really didn't touch on punk ourselves. I didn't get exposed to it till a lot later, really, until I came to the States. But we always had a passion for the harder rock that was hard to find on the radio in places like that in the UK. I found it refreshing when we came to the United States, and just the FM radio thing just alone, and the exposure that bands that you just didn't hear on the radio in the UK was very refreshing.
I could just see there was a trend coming, and so when I joined them in '77, that was before Dead Kennedys were known or any of that stuff. And so it was the Nuns, Crime, and Dills. Even though Dills were from LA, they had a big San Francisco presence. So we were kind of the first, I think, punk rock band really to really kind of do some stuff. We were offered some record deals, and of course we didn't take any of them. None of them were good enough. I'm not the one that made that decision at the time, but our manager did. But so yeah, we could play Winterland a number of times. That was kind of cool. We opened for Widowmaker. I was so embarrassed. I was apologizing to Ariel Bender. I said, I've been a big fan of yours in Spooky Tooth. I've been a fan of Widowmaker, and I'd have Widowmaker open for the Nuns. I thought at the time, at 19 years old, this doesn't seem fair, and he was very nice. But we played with Mother's Finest and Roxy Music, and played with Dictators, the Ramones, Blondie a couple of times. So we played all the venues, the Starwood in LA, the Whiskey.
Mickey's Mohawk was a crossover of we definitely had more of the punk roots of things for the, not just the image-wise of Mick's Mohawk, but the music too. It's almost the same difference of why Jet Boy and Guns N' Roses kind of had this click. Mm-hmm. It's because we both were really into the punk scene as well.
And every once in a while we would cross over and go play the punk club, just for fun, just to see what would happen. And of course our fans would follow us. It didn't matter where we were going. So, and it was, and the club owner just loved it,
Well, we had already heard about the punk rock scene in the Bay Area, which is why we came here, kind of landed here. And it did not disappoint when we got here. We immediately started getting gigs, and it was a great scene when we got here.
And when I saw James and Lars at a Discharge show at the Mad, and this one Discharge was hard. Yeah. And I'm standing there, man, back, because understand, in those days, it was not really cool for long-haired white guys to go to a punk show. Mm-hmm. It was not cool, man.
I went to a couple of Metallica parties in San Francisco, like people's apartments, right, and stuff. But I always felt, it wasn't my, they weren't my good friends. We didn't hang out a lot, but it seemed like I got some respect from them, and I, of course, was at their party and so on. But
there's no division of people. Rock and roll was rock and roll. I mean, being that the Mabuhay Gardens was right across from the Stone. I mean, Head On would play there all the time, and we had that group, full-on punk rockers there. That was the punk place. Right. But then we could also go across the street, and everybody intermingled. It was just like rock and roll.
Yeah, it wasn't like LA, because in 1980 in LA, you did not hang out. If you had long hair, you go to a punk rock club, you get your hair cut off.
Right.
And the next thing I know, man, Discharge were playing their music, and the crowd was ferocious, dude. It was ferocious, man. I wouldn't go nowhere near that shit, man. And next thing I know, I see James and Lars right in the middle of that shit. And them guys were trying to hurt him, man. It didn't mean shit. James and Lars would jump right back in there. When I saw that, I said, them motherfuckers is the real deal.
The scene in San Francisco supported both. And like I said, there were certain clubs that the punk guys were not so much at, but they were more at these other ones that were, next to the club or down the street or something like that. Right. And sort of, it was segregated to some degree. But we tried to, get in there and just mess with people every once in a while.
We got lost a little bit in the thrash movement. We were doing the heavy metal thing, and I remember sitting down with a couple labels in LA even. Said, hey, if you guys can kind of do this and do that, yeah, we'll get you in the studio. But it just, we wanted to play the music that we were doing.
The thing with Righteous Ire is that we're kind of, it's weird because we didn't quite make the thrash label. We never could go fast enough, with our abilities. And so we kind of just, always worked with what we could work with. And but we were borderline, and in the early 80s, thrash wasn't big yet, and so I wanted to go thrash heavier, but I think our abilities held us back, so we were always stuck in this category, You had the big hair bands, and then you had the other side of it. There was nothing in between, except Righteous Ire was in between, and so I think that played a big role in how Righteous Ire doesn't get recognized that much.
You never lose if you err on the side of heavier. Always. You always win if you go heavier. Like, that's my stock and trade. That's what I do.
There were some that definitely got hurt. I think Forbidden got hurt a lot because Forbidden was not truly a thrash band. They had thrash elements. Craig Locicero can play the shit out of a guitar, but they were miscategorized as being in the same boat as like an Exodus, and they just weren't.
Yeah, there's like the bands that went into the more hardcore arena, and then the bands that tried to do the arena. And Forbidden, Evil, and Forbidden always thought we were gonna make that leap into, that next level arena metal stuff, and that was always the plan. It just never worked out that way.
We were a little bit on the outside of that whole thrash metal thing. I was coming from Sabbath, Priest, Maiden, Alice Cooper, Kiss. I was thinking of those kind of arena acts for Vicious Rumors.
VR, we got signed, things started to happen. At the same time in the Bay Area, all the thrash metal bands started having all the opportunities. So I think in some way we kind of got lumped into the thrash thing.
If you weren't 100% into thrash the whole time, you knew that it was big and it was cool, and I know I had a lot of friends, and even some of the guys in my band loved thrash too when they were kids and younger, and then but there was such a ton of people that were into just regular giant rock, because that was getting bigger too.
That style and influence on you, and were you into a lot of those Bay Area thrash bands at that time?
Funny, not at all. I came more from the guitar player's side. I loved metal, but I was more into every style of guitar.
When I was in Cacophony, we played a lot of those thrash type of gigs at the Stone and the Omni and stuff like that, and I'd go on KUSF with Ron Quintana. But I was always kind of an outsider from that whole Exodus and who are the other bands, Testament and
Death Angel.
Death Angel. I was never really in that group hanging out, mainly because I don't really party very much. I was always working on music and writing music and recording and doing that. And these guys were socializing and partying and stuff, and I was kind of on the outside of that, but I really always liked their music and would only really see those guys kind of at gigs and very acquaintance at most.
The Bay Area was quite unique. It was truly a community where the musicians supported each other, yet it was not void of competition. Once Metallica broke into the mainstream, others were eager to follow, and many succeeded.
Spirit whispers
talk about this and want to try to be historically somewhat accurate, I think you can't separate Metallica from the scene.
But the good thing about the San Francisco scene is you had all these bands, you had all these fans, then you had the media to cover everything. We had a great camaraderie. It was like a brotherhood or something like that, a big gang. And it doesn't matter if you're a glam band, you're a thrash band, or a metal band, or a rock band, we all hung out at the same shows for a long time. I think until '86, everybody showed up. You know, guys from Head On would show up, guys from Jetboard would show up, Excess would show up everywhere, Bailoff would show up with Gary Holt on every show. And so we were just like, you know, we just loved music. It was cool. It wasn't before it got segmented.
You have somebody like Davy Vane producing the first Death Angel album, someone in the glam band producing a thrash band. Everybody got along, and everybody was friends, and it was genuine. It was a genuine time.
That's what everyone always says, of course, because we were all like cool with each other, but at the same time, everyone was like, you know, we were just trying to make a name for our band too. When you're playing with all these big great bands and stuff, you better have the goods or you're gonna get like just booed off the stage. You know, you wanted to have the pit going and stage diving going on.
We were a little bit on the outskirts of most of those guys because they grew up in the northern part of the Bay and the East Bay and San Francisco. We were in Fremont, which is like suburbs. So we came out and there was a little bit of resistance to us at first because we were so melodic and we had a singer that was so different than everybody else. But yeah, it was so thrashy that it was like they were a little taken back by us at first. So they welcomed us in after, it took us a few months to kind of, like where Exodus was cool and everyone was cool. Because at first they're like, who are these guys? So I know you, but who the fuck are these guys? So, but that ended quickly and it was only a blip. But it was always cool from that point on, and especially now, dude, that camaraderie has really flourished, and everybody is really happy to see each other these days. We all see each other. Everybody's like, dude, you know, we did this together. You know, we're all a part of that. You just kind of feel, you don't have to say it, but everyone knows it.
But it was a lot less segregated than you'd think. A lot of people that, you know, yeah, they'd talk crap to each other, but usually they were there like holding beers in the air at the same shows.
There was really no competition between the bands. They were all friends, they were all brothers, they all supported each other. You went to a Lars Rocket show and all the Exodus guys were in the audience, right? And vice versa. And that's what I loved about the San Francisco scene. There was no put down of bands. They were all supporting each other and playing each other because it's such a tight community.
We saw new bands like Death Angel, for example, and the thrash scene seemed to fit hand in hand with it. You know, you saw people at the thrash shows, and you'd also see them at the classic metal shows as well. And I think it was just the whole vibe of it all. And some of it was much more heavy than the other, but you'd see the same people. And it didn't seem, even though it was a healthy competition between the bands, it didn't seem, at least I didn't see any of the real cutthroat stuff. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but there was much more of a sense of community about it all, you know, and a support within the bands for each other.
Like, all the people in the bands were all hanging out. It wasn't like the bands and the fans, we were all just together. There wasn't a separation.
In the beer gardens, everyone's walking around like it's the Warriors, the movie, or everyone's a gang, and everyone's got their thing, and these guys got their leather vests, and these guys are in debt. You know, it's just, that's was fun about it, I thought.
We were treated different, like you said. There was no competition when we went there, even because we come from out of town. I don't think they felt we were a threat. We were a visitor. They welcomed us with open arms. Look how Slayer and Exodus became. We became real tight friends. It was a good experience for us up there.
And Exodus didn't really have a competition because they kind of just got the next deal, and then there was a lot of other bands behind them.
In the same way that we may have inspired the scene also inspired us. We may have influenced the scene, but the scene also, do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's just one big fucking mesh of just people and energy and moments, you know, that just happened over the course of a while, and it was like a year or two where it was just fucking vibing.
We'd do the same. We'd go there to support other bands, and we always had a great night when we went out to these places, and we always felt warmly welcomed when we played any club in the city.
And there were some great bands, you know, that we got to see as well. You know, I remember Roadrunner, Steel,
Exodus I saw. Was you at the Exodus?
Yes,
show? Yeah?
yes, I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking probably 82, 83.
Yes, they were competitive, but at the same time, if they saw one of them in trouble or needed help, they were there to help and support them. And I loved it about the San Francisco scene.
The scene was fueled by drugs and fueled by bands trying to get deals. Everybody was trying to get a deal. Everyone was. The record companies kept coming up weekly, like to see Metallica, to see Exodus, to see us, to see Vane. We were the ones that took the longest to get a deal. I sat in every office in LA with Barney, and we thought we were going to get signed like 3 or 4 times. And then finally Columbia came back like a year later. And I guess I owe it all to Ron Keel.
But I think one of the things about it that was kind of interesting was, for the most part, we didn't hold grudges. And I think that our scene, we sort of policed ourselves. And we didn't have the attention all the time of record companies or executives or these people who looked at you as if your behavior is going to be a risk. Yeah, so we were pretty much.
I don't think anybody here paid attention to that either.
I didn't really get into the music. I didn't hang around any rockers, so we were kind of isolated. And most of the black people weren't winning. They thought I was fucking crazy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But my folks, my dad, he wasn't so much into it, but they tolerated it. My folks, my mom, she was in my corner. You know what I mean? So, but most of the people, oh man, they joked. Oh, we got that. That's what some of the determination came from, just getting ridiculed.
Heavy metal shows started to pop up all over the Bay Area. It all began with the old Waldorf when they started the Metal Mondays series. The first show featured Motley Crue with Anvil Chorus, followed soon by Motorhead's first appearance in San Francisco. Clubs like the Three Keystones in San Francisco, Berkeley, and Palo Alto, Wolfgangs, and later the Omni, off-Broadway, and finally the haven for the heaviest of the thrash bands, Ruth is In.
So here we are. I'm here with John Stranansky in the heart of downtown San Francisco. We're standing in front of yet another historic building. Why don't you tell us about this, John?
This, believe it or not, this was the old Waldorf. And, when we called the Stone ground zero for the metal scene here, this was really the genesis. This was really the genesis. The old Waldorf had shows here back in the 70s. People like Pat Benatar, those kind of rockers played here. But 1981, the first Metal Monday, Motley Crue and an Anvil Chorus. They really kicked off what the San Francisco metal scene was all about.
There was a lot of music going on. There was a lot of bands trying to play places, and there was nowhere to play. So we do things like put on our own shows.
Let's mention our good friend Kathy Page, who used to work for KRQR. Yeah. She was amazing. She's the one who started Metal Mondays. And Kathy Page. I didn't know that. She was amazing. Everybody's mother, but even though she was a young hottie.
But she also was program director at KRQR, which was the biggest FM radio rock station up there. Wow. So she put on these shows, and if she liked you,
promote you,
she'd help you out immensely.
Thank goodness for people like the Corona brothers who booked the Keystone clubs, or Tony Isabella and Rachel Matthews who booked us all at the old Waldorf. These are essential people that made these opportunities for all the bands.
That Metal Monday scene at the old Waldorf, that was the best club to play at in the Bay Area at the time. All the bands were playing at there was a lot of venues in San Francisco. There was, you had Morty's, you had The Stone, you had Rock on Broadway, you had Mabuhay Gardens, and you had live music 5 nights a week.
But I think the Metal Monday thing was an all ages thing. And when that came on, we were really ready for something to happen.
The Metal Monday stuff was, it was a legacy by the time I was in the scene, but that was already done. So I had just come in on the back end of that, and Ruthie's was it, right? So you get those Metal Monday, those like Laws Rocket, I'm thinking, was it Control, like all those bands, Anvil Chorus, and then, whoever would come up from LA to do it. I know Metallica got their start doing that stuff there.
We were in tune with these people, and they gave us a chance, and we got a chance to do this Motley Crue thing.
Anvil, of course, opened up for both Motorhead and Motley Crue, Motorhead had been around, I think, and I remember Lemmy telling us that we played too many notes. Right. And I was thinking that's what they said about Mozart.
Let's see, there was Anvil Chorus, Hans Naughty, and Motley Crue. I think that's what it was. We actually opened the show.
Part of what I liked about Metal Mondays and even at the Stones was some of the LA bands would come out. I'd sort of get hip to some of these bands, but I remember when Motley Crue came and played Metal Mondays, and they came on, I thought they fucking sucked. My friends and I, we stood at the back of the room, we threw ice at them while they're playing. We're going, Motley Crud, fuck you.
What's real interesting about this club, I mean, if you look around, we're in such an oasis, right, in downtown San Francisco. It's quiet up here. This is built on top of a garage, and you kind of walk into this tranquil garden, and here is one of the coolest rock clubs that I've ever been to, right, the old Waldorf. The Punchline in the background was here back in the early 80s, so that's still around. But it's really interesting where they chose to put this club at.
Yeah, I always thought very interesting location.
And what's interesting, the way it's built, if you walk inside, the backstage door is right there, right next to the front entrance. Right. And the bands actually just walked right to the crowd or to the stage. It was very, very fan-friendly.
Overdrive was a band that consisted of Randy Ferreira on bass, Mark Pena on drums, Mike Carsey on guitar, and myself on guitar and vocals. And we were high school buddies, and we started playing in the Bay Area music scene when we were about 15, 16. We would do gigs at the old Waldorf on Metal Mondays, and we would play our set, and then we'd have to go hang out in the dressing room because we were too young to hang out in the club.
The Waldorf Metal Mondays, I remember being in high school and them announcing Righteous Sire playing Metal Mondays, and I thought I was a real rock star then when I heard my name on the radio. And Mabuhay Gardens on Broadway, Keystone Palo Alto, the Stone in San Francisco was kind of our little circuit, and so we would just rotate between those clubs. We never really traveled or anything. We were always a Bay Area band.
All these places, pretty soon the old Waldorf had to have metal bands every Monday. Then the MAB had to have metal bands every Sunday. They had Brutal Sundays. So all these clubs started adding metal nights, and all these little kids suddenly had places to play. It was amazing.
When I first started coming up to the Bay Area, we had connected with Tambray Bryant, Michael Oliver, with L&L Productions, and they were doing a series of shows at the Mabuhay Gardens. That was my introduction, and there was a seedy, it started out as a punk club, right?
Yeah.
And it was just this seedy, amazingly cool club. It was unlike anything I've ever seen.
The best place in town to play was the Stone.
No, the Waldorf was
the Waldorf was the best, yeah, but that didn't last as long.
Here we are. So this was it, man. The Stone, ground zero, huh?
This was indeed ground zero of the metal scene here in San Francisco. This was where everybody came here. Everybody was here. Everybody met up here. First show for Metallica ever outside Los Angeles.
Metal Massacre night, yeah.
With, I believe, with Bitch. Yes. It was, what a night. Really got everything started here.
You were at that show. You came up with Lars, right? You drove up with him.
Came up with Lars. They picked me up down in Monterey. We drove up together and eventually asked me to announce them on stage. So it was a great memory and a fantastic start to a whole new era in San Francisco metal.
The Stone had 3 clubs, and they were spread throughout the Bay Area, and we played all 3 of them religiously, and especially the one in Palo Alto, which was sort of between San Jose and San Francisco. That just became the place to play, especially for hard rock music. It just, Keystone Palo Alto, that was it. And they jam like almost 1,000 people into this place. And it wasn't very big, but the way it was set up, you could do that.
The Stone was a magical place. The Omni was a magical place. I don't see any clubs like that now. They might be in like Philadelphia. I went on a Gore tour later and I saw some clubs like that, but they were on the East Coast. But all that stuff it's like all in the Bay Area. The clubs now are nothing like that anymore. They're all strip clubs now because you can't make the money.
The Chatterbox. Well, that was a fun place because that was an interesting crossover point where punk and metal kind of intersected. It was kind of a small place, not the greatest sound system, but adequate, But the vibe was all about the vibe, and they had a Kiss pinball machine, and they had Johnny Thunders spray painted, some shit on the rafters, so you can't argue with a pedigree like that.
At the location of the old Keystone Palo Alto, huh?
Indeed. Can't recognize this place anymore.
Wow.
Sure looked different 30 years ago, but
metal hangout.
Yeah, this was kind of where the whole South Bay got going with their heavy metal scene. First show I ever saw here was Saxon back in 1982 when they played the 3 Keystones around the Bay Area. And hey, Trauma opens down here. How awesome is that, with Cliff Burton? And this club endured for quite a while. I believe I saw Michael Schenker here as late as 1995 or so. Wow. So this club endured for a while, but now gentrified and a whole different neighborhood now.
We played the Mabuhay Gardens, we played the Rock on Broadway, we played the Cocodrie, we played Morty's, we played the Omni, the Keystone Berkeley, the I-Beam. Oh, did I not say Ruthie's?
You didn't say Ruthie's.
Ruthie's Inn, and every club that existed. The Farm.
Yes.
Yeah, we played every fucking club.
Well, luckily for us, you could have pretty hardcore bands at the MAB. And then the poppier metal bands. But you had to go to Ruthie's for the more intense bands in 83 and 84. And so Slayer would play there first, and Megadeth would play there eventually. And, just the heavier and heavier bands played at Ruthie's because you get away with more, You could do anything.
There used to be a club called Ruthie's in Berkeley, California. I don't think it's there anymore. Just sick. Again, spit on, beer cans thrown at me. It was just, as I said before, a good training ground. You had to learn how to try to get the crowd in. I loved it. It was like football practice. It was pretty wild.
My first club show that I went to was Exciter and Griffin at the Stone. And my next club show was Possessed and Hyrax at the MAB, Mabuhay Gardens.
Of course. Yeah.
And then not even a few months later, I was playing Ruthie's Inn at 15.
Then the Stone and all the Stones, those were hot spots, as well as Ruthie's Inn was here in the East Bay, was a place where a lot of bands played. And at Ruthie's was an interesting venue because one night you'd have punk rock, the next night you'd have rock and roll, the next night you'd have heavy metal.
Ruthie's would have a show Friday, Saturday, maybe a Sunday afternoon, and then Tuesday or Wednesday during the week they would be like Death Angel, Forbidden, Evil, and Legacy, on a Wednesday, and it would start at 6, and the headliner would go on 9:30. There was so much of a scene that we could have that many bands, and people would show up.
I mean, even Armored Saint and these bands, that we were all compatible in a way. I think what we mostly brought were great shows. It wasn't necessarily about a scene, because the scene was evolving. The scene was sort of coming together sort of harmoniously between the bands, especially at the beginning.
Nobody knew exactly where it was going to go, and
that's a great point.
And it grew in itself. When Ruthie's Inn opened, it just opened up a whole new field. I mean, Ruthie's Inn, the guy who ran Ruthie's Inn was willing to put on anything that would put money in his pocket. And metal just it was the perfect home for it. There's no problem with the police. We were standing.
They weren't going to come down to where it was. They didn't want to come to that area.
And it was just the perfect storm for metal.
You remember Day on the Green, right? Well, Wes Robinson had Day on the Dirt. And it was at Aquatic Park in Berkeley. And it was a hell of a bill. It was Blue Cheer. It was Suicidal Tendencies, Exodus, Slayer, us, Roadrunner, and a bunch of other bands.
I remember us playing a festival called
Dirt Fest?
Day on the Dirt.
Yeah.
Instead of Day on the Green, It was Day on the Dirt, and it was all punk bands. Exodus, Suicidal was playing. Yeah. It's amazing.
We played Ruthie's Inn a lot. That was the place. And there's that guy named Wes who used to book there. You go there and you stay at his house and you play the show. And every band I talked to, he owed everyone money. I'm sure he still owes us money too. But that was a cool scene, and we played with a lot of bands. I remember when Legacy opened for us. I think Alex was like 16 or something like that. And I still have a lot of memories of that place fresh in my mind because they were fun shows.
When it came our first opportunity to play a show, I went and talked to Wes Robinson at Ruthie's Inn, and I was a snot-nosed, cocky kid, and I was like, hey, I got this band. I was like acting manager, the youngest guy in the band. Rob's like, go talk to him. He's like, you go talk to him. So I did, and we got offered the Metal Church show for the Eastern Front. It was all this Eastern Front series of shows where no one knew they were being really recorded for it, but
We were. And so we played at Metal Church that night, opened the whole show, and people pretty much freaked out for us the first time.
Yeah, Broadway and Avenue in San Francisco.
Oh my God! And during that era,
a 2-block stretch had the Stone, the Chi-Chi Club, the Mab, which is now the Rock on Broadway, which is upstairs from it. That was a special little area, and of course all your wonderful strip clubs. But in San Francisco,
20-something musicians was a great moment in time.
We had our friend Brent Turner open up the Rock on Broadway.
He did real well there for a little while until he started having his bouncer throw people down that flight of stairs. 2-story flight of stairs, straight line. Don Chigi would just, woo! People were like, ah!
A band could play Oakland and in that same month play San Francisco and still draw 250 people, which is unheard of now. But it was a different scene back then.
John Nady, with some of the money he made off the Nady System stuff, he owned up the Omni in Oakland. I go to a lot of shows there. I saw probably every local metal band. I mean, Vicious Rumors, Testament when they were Legacy, Blind Illusion with Les Claypool, Trauma with Cliff Burton.
After the Stone and everything kind of tamed down, the Omni in Oakland was the place.
Yeah, none of this conversation could happen without mentioning.
Yeah, the Omni was essential, just as essential and important.
And the thing about, especially about the Omni, was you would go in there and all the bands would be in there. So, you know, they were not playing, just having beers or whatever. And there was kind of a rule that you didn't talk to the bands. You just sort of left them alone. And me being me, I did not leave any of them alone. I was like, oh, dude, you know, I can't believe I'm meeting you, you know, and whatever. And they were all just unbelievably cool. And they all would give me tapes. And, you know, at the time it was all tapes. And so I grew into it really big in the late 80s up into the early 90s.
Or even bands like Lynch Mob, you know, George Lynch's project. They would play these three rooms at 3 or 4 dates in the Bay Area, even sometimes getting an outside promoter, and they would still do like 800 tickets a night.
All of the bands were very lucky. There was a good variety of clubs to play, you know.
There was, and
a good following when you got there.
Yeah. I'm just very proud to be part of that whole era, that whole scene that just sprang up. Great. It was wonderful.
Yeah. But we had these great places to play where you could put on shows, like you're talking about really with our big stages. Yeah. And pyro, because my manager could finagle his friggin' way into saying it's going to be really small. I don't know how many stages we set on fire or blew holes in the roof.
The world took notice. Soon, the Bay Area bands were touring the planet, appearing at many of the prestigious European clubs and festivals. The record labels started to sign them one after another, gaining them international acclaim.
Finally, when we went over in '82 to the UK, we went over there to record the Black Tiger record. We met with some of the A&M guys over there, and they're like, I don't know what your American counterpart is doing, but we're kicking ass over here for you guys. You guys are, you know, you guys are taking off, and you haven't even played a show here yet. And we're like, you know, we had seen some of the stuff, but we didn't know what was actually happening until we started playing shows over there.
What's interesting is that the scene that was in San Francisco is just maniacal and crazy as it was. This scene started to spread everywhere else. I mean, the Anthrax guys saw it in their turf in New York. You know, as we did the Killing Is My Business tour and went across the country, you could see that this scene was building everywhere, you know, across the country. And then as we all started to go to Europe, it's like, okay, this is a new scene. This isn't even the old new wave of British heavy metal scene. This is a brand new one.
Because when we first went to New York for the first time, we toured with Venom and Slayer, like, we were doing interviews and like talking to people. Yeah, we heard you on W blah 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 in fucking Syracuse, New York, and like people were putting in the work back then to, like, you know, get this music out there and get it heard.
Every time we tried to form something in the Bay Area with the people that were there, it turned into drama and disaster. And it's still that way because I still have property there. So it's the place. I thought it was the place then. Now I know that it's true. It was the place. Right. You know. So if I imported people from Chicago, it went better. And the Chicago guys were like meat eaters. They were like ready to kill people. You know, like, let's go out and play. Come on, man. You know, and the Bay Area guys were like, well, man, you know, after we're done smoking some joints, I guess. You know, it was like totally different guys.
If you look at the different scenes that there are there, with Florida having the death metal scene and San Francisco being considered the thrash metal scene and LA being considered the hair metal scene, and with all these different things that are going on, it's kind of a like-minded mentality, and I think that's why certain scenes thrive, because all the bands are doing certain things the same.
The Bay Area metal scene is, even though it got a lot of publicity in the underground press, it never got the mainstream publicity that LA got for metal or what Seattle got for grunge. And even history books that cover the history of Bay Area, even in articles, I mean, they always talk about the Summer of Love in the 60s with, the Jefferson Airplane or the Grateful Dead or whatever. And then they even cover the 70s punk explosion in the Bay Area with the Dead Kennedys, the Nuns, and the Avengers and things like that. And then, of course, we have the classic rock Journey, Night Ranger, Santana, Huey Lewis and the News and all that stuff. That gets a lot of publicity. And then, of course, Metallica does, because they were from here, because they had so much success and sold so many millions of records. But then the whole overall metal scene that was out here, which had worldwide success, seems to get ignored or overlooked. And I think that's just a crime and an atrocity.
One time I was hanging out with Lemmy, and and he's known to be so hardcore, and I just played with Skid Row at Hammersmith Odeon. At the end of the show, all of us in Skid Row and Van got on stage, and Lemmy and Robert Plant were there. And Lemmy get on stage, and we did Train Kept a Rollin'. And Lemmy, I was standing right next to Lemmy because I was like, oh man, this is Hammersmith Odeon. Lemmy's here, and this is the first time I played here. He went over to the bass rig, he had his bass on, and he just put his hand across the top of the whole amp, just went, then he looked at me, he goes, "It's my settings." And so after we did the show, we're walking on the street, and I had like these leather pants with rings, and so I looked kind of, still kind of glammy, whatever you want to call it. Just to me it was rock and roll. It's like, the Stooges glam, or I don't know. To me it's just rock and roll, So we're walking down the street, and I'm walking next to Lemmy, and there's a big party we're going to. Some kid comes up and yells at Lemmy, "Hey Lemmy, that guy's a poser. He's wearing look at those pants, what a fag," or something like that. And he goes, "Hey, shut the fuck up, you snot nose." He goes, "Those trousers are rock and roll. It's about getting pussy. If I can get my ass in there, I'd wear them too if I got laid tonight." And the guy's like, "Oh, sorry, Lemmy."
I saw Steeler up in Sacramento play a warehouse, and I wish I could recall all the details of why they ended up in a warehouse, but I show up, I'm all excited to see Steeler, and Yngwie's not there on guitar. It's this guy, Kurt James, who was a great player, don't get me wrong, he's fabulous. And so I watched the show, they play the whole record, it's all good, everything, and I go to Ron at the show, "Where's Yngwie? Where's your guitar player? Where's Yngwie?" He goes, "Yngwie Malmsteen is a penis with fingers." And I still remember that quote.
I played with them at Huntown that day, and there was this rich woman named Sally Proctor that lived, and she was at Garris to Procter & Gamble, and she was a big partier. And she had a warehouse with all sound equipment in Nevada. So she called me that day, I was rehearsing with all of them, and she goes, "I got Metallica up here at my studio. Come up here and sing Led Zeppelin songs," because James didn't want to, or he was too high or something. I don't know what it was. So I came up there totally high out of my mind, right? And sang Led Zeppelin songs with Metallica. This motherfucker probably has something to say. Whoa. Hello. Hello. Giorgio. Hello.
We're talking Bay Area metal, dude.
So good for you.
Good for you.